what's happening in our country today is not normal. Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans represent an extremism that threatens the very foundations of our republic. MAGA Republicans do not respect the Constitution. They do not believe in the rule of law. They do not recognize the will of the people. They refuse to accept the results of a free election.
All right, so that's President Joe Biden basically talking about how dangerous and extreme MAGA Republicans are. All right, let's see some other clips.
Joe Biden just moments ago gave an Oval Office address where he offered no explanation for why he dropped out of the race. His former opponent, Donald Trump, was pictured watching from Air Force One. There he is. Here now, Trump campaign press secretary Caroline Leavitt. Caroline, what did the former president say about Biden's farewell address?
Well, we certainly know why Biden gave his farewell address to the nation tonight, and it's because President Trump delivered the ultimate knockout to Joe Biden on the debate stage last month. If President Trump hadn't had such a dominant debate performance over Crooked Joe, then Kamala Harris and the entire Democrat Party would still be lying to us about Biden's cognitive decline, trying to shuffle him over the finish line in November. But thanks to President Trump, the Democrats have been exposed for who they are, a bunch of liars who are the real threats to democracy. And now the Democrat Party elite have tossed aside 14 million ballots to install Kamala Harris, who is just as weak and incompetent as Joe Biden, yet she's worse because she is dangerously liberal. She's a radical leftist. And if you want to know...
All right, so there's Trump press secretary calling Kamala Harris a dangerous liberal and a radical leftist. So, what actually is extremism? So, Donald Trump, while he is considered unorthodox for American politics, he isn't by no means an extremist. Yes, there are many on the left who would say that Trump is an extremist, but if you look at it from a centrist perspective, Donald Trump's political views aren't really that extreme. His stances on social issues like abortion, gun rights, gay marriage are actually surprisingly moderate for a Republican. Yes, does he challenge election results? Yes, is he kind of annoying sometimes? But he's not necessarily an extremist in the sense that you would strictly define the term. And then you look at Kamala Harris, again, like Donald Trump. Is she annoying sometimes? Yes. But does that necessarily make her an extremist? Like, she doesn't really have any viewpoints that are that extreme. I mean, she's pro-capitalism. She hasn't really ever called for something like defunding the police or something which many of the much more progressive Democrats call for. So yeah, Mr. P, what's your take on the whole extremism thing?
I think that they're just using that word as, you know, they just want to gain. Oh, they want to make you like fear the other side, and they think, oh, extremism is a great way because a lot of people fear extremism because of what they have done in this world. Extremists, you know, are like have done a lot of atrocities and stuff, but like, so the people here who they claim that the other side are extremists are not even close, in my opinion. They're just trying. They're just trying to sway voters against the opponent, and they are like, in my opinion, biased. They don't even believe like that they're doing that. They're like swaying. They're trying to sway. They actually believe that they're extremists because of like their conflicts.
Yeah, I agree with that. They're just using extremism as a punchline without knowing what it actually is. Like, all those people who call Trump a fascist, I don't even, like, Trump is not a fascist. And then, like, Democrats are not communists. Like, they're just, like, they're exaggerating things, which is what all politicians do. And they're just using it to gain voters, and they're just playing with fear politics. So, with that being said, what is actual extremism? Actual extremism is stuff like fascism, or extreme anarchy, which are both very atrocious ideologies. But yeah, so what would actual extremism look like in terms of on both sides of the aisle, whether you're a right wing or left wing? What would extremism on both sides of those aisle look like? Well, we bring back the political compass, which has the right authoritarian quadrant, the right libertarian, the left libertarian and the left authoritarian quadrants. We're going to look at what the most extreme political ideology in each of these quadrants are and what they would look like. So I'm not exactly a huge fan of the political compass. I think there are many flaws with the test. Like, for example, they tend to measure how right-wing or left-wing you are based off of economics, based off of, like, whether you want a centralized government or a decentralized government, whether you want higher or lower taxes, despite the fact that sometimes centralized government is used to promote conservatism, and sometimes decentralized government is used to promote liberalism. And as for the authoritarian libertarian quadrant, they're using that for social policies, when in reality I think they got it flipped. I think that social policy should be the left-right quadrant, while the economic policy, like whether the government is centralized or not, should be the authoritarian libertarian axis. I think that's how they should do it. And if you actually look at it, you look at an issue like tariffs, for example. For many years, Republicans wanted high tariffs, but then after Reagan and Bush, they kind of moved towards free trade. And that's not because Republicans all of a sudden became conservatives and they were liberals before. It's because earlier they viewed tariffs as a conservative measure, and now they're viewing free trade as a conservative measure. So it's kind of like when you look at what conservatism and liberalism actually are, the whole idea of conservatism is what arose from the French Revolution, which is the idea that current and social hierarchies should be upheld, and that there requires to be a certain level of hierarchy in society rather than just dismantling hierarchy altogether. And liberalism calls for less hierarchy and more rule to the people, while conservatism calls for more hierarchy, more structure, and all of that stuff. And when you look at Ronald Reagan, his whole idea was about cutting taxes, and that may seem like a conservative ideology because that's what Reagan was going for. But look at someone like Alexander Hamilton, whose whole idea about the centralization of government was to promote conservative political ideologies, such as favoring the more wealthy and keeping current social hierarchies intact. And then you look at, on the left wing side of it, Andrew Jackson. Well, yes, he was kind of a little bit not exactly a man of today by with regards to race relations, but for his time he was notably progressive. He called for stuff like allowing every person who was a um, every white male to vote, which was actually a progressive position by that time, because at the time they only allowed white male property owners to vote. This time, Jackson, however, called for all white men to be able to vote, which was a pretty progressive policy point for the time. He also called for more rule for the common man, and he was against the, quote, moneyed interests. And his whole way of going through this was by decentralizing the government and by making the overall role of government in the economy much smaller. And then you look at someone like Franklin D. Roosevelt. He also called for helping the common man. However, his way of doing so was noticeably different from Jackson, and he actually wanted to strengthen the federal government's role in the economy and provide more aid and more government as a whole. So, the whole idea behind conservatism and liberalism is that conservatism basically seeks to uphold current social hierarchies, and it's kind of the whole idea that change is not really that necessary in society, and it should be done more slowly and gradually rather than rapidly and suddenly. So, yeah, that's what conservatism and liberalism actually are, and that's what the European definitions of those ideologies are, and considering how they originated from Europe, I think we should use those definitions instead of the American definitions today. So,
I have one thing to say.
yeah.
Your definitions are good, and like how you explain them are good. I just have the one thing to say for like a simpler version for people who like are kind of confused. Conservatism wanna like stay the same. It's kind of like it's kind of a bit vague, but like I wanna keep what the current system is, while liberals they want to change. They want to have more like power to the not power to the people. That's like what he said, but like they want to change. So it's just
Yeah.
change versus staying the same, in my opinion.
I mean, that you can kind of derive that from their roots. Like, conserved means, like, keep it the same. Well, liberal, or, like, that's, like, change. Like, yeah. So you can kind of derive that from their roots. But when you look at the authoritarian libertarian axis, of course, this should kind of be more so like whether they favor a stronger government, more active role, or a weaker government, less active role. So, yeah, that's basically how authoritarianism and libertarianism work. So I think the political compass test has it backwards. So anyway, I think social policy should be left right, while economic policy should be top down. So overall, if the aim is to conserve society as it is, then it's a conservative ideology. If it wants to change society, then it's a liberal ideology. So we're going to look at what the most extreme ideologies are in each quadrant, like what the most extreme ideology is in the left libertarian quadrant. These are individuals who want as little government as possible, possibly even abolishing the government as a whole, but they also want a lot of social equality. So, the ideology that is the most extreme in the left libertarian quadrant is what is known as primitive communism. So, primitive communism is basically an ideology which states that the agricultural revolution and the industrial revolution were both disasters, and that humanity needs to return to its roots. And by roots, I mean roots, which is go back to being hunter gatherers. And they state that life was much more equal under this society, there weren't any hierarchies, and that hierarchies as well as environmental pollution came as a result of the industrial and agricultural revolutions, and that to make it so all people are actually equal, we need to go back to primitive hunter-gatherer societies. And considering how this is a communist ideology, actual communism, not the Leninist Stalinist communism, but actual communism from Karl Marx, states that after a transitive government is established, you need to abolish the government totally once equality is made. So this is basically an anarchist ideology that states no government and return all humanity back to its original roots as hunter-gatherers. Mr. P, what are your thoughts on this ideology?
First off, for examples of people who are like believing this. You know that one guy, like the guy who sent bombs to people. Forgot his name. He's like really like okay. You know that guy like he
Uh,
sent bombs to professors.
no, I'm not familiar with that.
Okay, never mind. Well, I rate this ideology on how bad it is out of 10. The higher the number is, how is bad, and the lower the number is, it's good. I rate this 10 out of 10. I don't like this ideology. First off, it says no to technology, which I guess some people can have the idea, but it like forces people that like the technological lifestyle back into the primitive. And second off, it's unrealistic. There people who have like the technological power, why would they give up their weapons to people who they want to stay primitive? The people with the weapons can just overthrow the government who actually want to change, and you know what? Now they are like authoritarian and like can like become like a monarchy or something.
And this
I,
ideology is also unrealistic because the government is never going to give up power. Like, they're not going to dissolve themselves after achieving this goal. That's never going to happen. That's why communism can never really work in practice.
Also, the idea that primitive lifestyle is better than our modern lifestyle is, I believe, false. I mean, would
I'd
you rather
honestly,
die at the age of 30 from disease and because you got eaten by a lion than die at the age of 70 because your back hurts or something? I don't know. That's just bad.
honestly, I'd give this ideology a 1,000 out of 10 in terms of how bad it is.
I agree.
Okay,
Anyway, on to the next one.
so let's now go to the left authoritarian quadrant. This is where we see Leninism, the idea from communist Vladimir Lenin. So Lenin had his own idea of communism. He didn't believe that the state should dissolve itself. He wanted a permanent state to protect communism and the idea of equality, and he wanted a very authoritarian state. And this was his whole idea of like a communist utopia where everybody would be equal. And unlike Joseph Stalin, his successor, Lenin actually genuinely believed in equality. He believed in racial equality, equality even for sexual orientation, which was very unique for the 1920s. And he believed in gender equality. He also believed in open borders and letting more immigrants in. And he believed that the struggle of immigrant workers is the same as natural workers. So he's not really he wasn't a nativist by any means. So when it comes to the issue of social equality, Lenin was absolutely very much in favor of that. And then when it comes to authoritarianism, of course, he believed in a very authoritarian federal government that would suppress free speech and make sure that everybody is a communist. So, what are your thoughts on Leninism?
Uh, it's not as bad as our previous ideology, which is like primitive, like Leninism. But I still have to give it a 7 out of 10 on the bad scale. I mean, the idea itself is good. I love equality. Everyone loves equality, but it's just unrealistic. First off, the people. Why would they have to work, right? That's just the main central problem in communism. If you not drive to work and you still get the benefits, why should you care to work? It's the free rider problem. Second, the government. The government won't just, like be cool and stuff. They have power, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So obviously the government's going to be corrupt. Well, will that happen? That'll lead to authoritarian regime, and no one's happy anymore because they're just taxing everyone, they're killing everyone, blah blah blah. Think of the worst. Anyway,
Honestly, I think another issue with communism is that instead of bringing everybody up to equality, what it does is it drags the middle class and the upper class down to where the lower class is, and it makes everybody equally poor.
I
So,
disagree on that. Like there are people who are exploited in our current society, but like, yeah, I don't like being poor, but yeah.
all right, yeah. So that's basically Leninism, the most extreme ideology in the upper left, upper authoritarian quadrant. So let's go to the right authoritarian quadrant, where we see an ideology that has killed millions of people, which is Nazism. So Nazism is
I
basically,
want to say, yeah, you did kill people, but like the other ideologies also killed people besides primitive anarchism because
yeah, yeah.
this.
Leninism also killed plenty of people, no doubt about it. But I think Stalinism was overall more destructive than Leninism was.
Yeah, I agree, but like, yeah.
I'd honestly argue Stalinism was more like fascism than it was communism.
Well, yeah,
So anyway,
that's
back to Nazism. This was basically the forced, basically anybody who the government viewed as undesirable was forced into a concentration camp. This wasn't just Jewish people. This was black people. This was communists. This was just anybody who wasn't the perfect Aryan, blonde hair, blue eyes sort of thing. So yeah, it killed millions of people, and
this is also the first country that this is also the first ideology that actually has a country that actually followed this ideology. Insane.
I mean, the Soviet Union did follow Leninism for a while, but then it moved towards Stalinism.
Well, like it was not really true Leninism. It didn't really, do anything.
Yeah, that is true. So when you look at the Nazi Party, this is something that kind of throws off many conservatives who argue that Nazism is a left-wing ideology. They say that because it's called the National Socialist German Workers' Party, it's a socialist ideology. Therefore, it's a far-left ideology. But that is not true at all because if you look at what fascism actually is, and considering how Nazism is a form of fascism, this is what Benito Mussolini's quote is, which is fascism should rightly be called corporatism, as it is the merger of corporate and government power. This was something that Adolf Hitler actually followed through. And if you look at that, and if you look at this, fascism is actually more right wing economically than most conservative ideologies are, because it basically has corporations and governments working together, and the governments and corporations both try to keep stuff unequal and try to persecute people, and overall, there's still a wide wealth disparity in Nazism. So yeah, Nazism is not a left wing ideology. And in many ways, actually, the Nazis hated communists as much as they hated Jewish people, and many communists and alleged socialists were thrown into concentration camps as well. So Nazism is not a left wing ideology; it's a far right ideology. It's the most extreme right wing authoritarian ideology. So, what do you say, Mr. P?
Well, yeah, I agree with you that it's not really a left-wing ideology, and I also agree with you that they hate communists. I mean, we see it all the time. We see Hitler despise communists, and we see a lot of people in the not so cool party uh, hate communists. So they're not really on good terms.
Yeah, on the bad scale, this is definitely like 1,000 out of 10. Also,
Yeah, but like I'm actually doing following to my scale, so I'm gonna put it a 10 out of 10. But actually, there is a worse version of this, which is like esoteric Nazism. But like
what's it called?
esoteric Nazism
What is that?
is basically Nazism, but like, oh, Hitler didn't do enough. We should kill more people. They nuke the world
Hitler
because
didn't do enough is crazy. So yeah. So let's just say this encompasses like all forms of Nazism. So let's go to the right libertarian quadrant and see what the most extreme ideology there. It is something called anarcho-capitalism. Now the title may seem contradictory, but hear it out. So basically, what anarcho-capitalism is it has a capitalist society, but it abolishes the government, just like it says in anarchy, and instead services are granted out towards by corporations towards people. Corporations can have weapons, they can arm themselves, they also provide services like healthcare. It basically has no government and everything is run by the private sector. That's what anarcho capitalism is. And you may think that this is actually not very unequal, and it basically is like it doesn't really uphold social hierarchy that much, but it actually does because the whole idea behind anarcho-capitalism is people should be able to make their own choices without the federal government at all. So when it comes towards discriminating against groups like African Americans or Jewish people, people can do so and corporations can do so and private companies as well as facilities can do so without any regulations from the government because they believe it is a freedom of choice to discriminate against other individuals. So, yeah, that's the whole idea behind anarcho capitalism. So, what are your views on this ideology, Mr. P?
I mean this ideology is just as stupid as anarcho-Leninism. I mean, who thought it was a good idea to be under corporates? Like that's actually the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my entire life. Like,
Yeah.
you want to be under Big Brother? You want to work for Mark Zuckerberg, the alien, who will force you to work in his sweatshop? Like, I don't get it, me personally. I mean, I might be, like, biased or something, but I don't see any good merits in this. I mean, they could be like, oh, let's go equality. Yeah, but are you sure it's going to lead to equality? I have the same problems as I do with anarcho communism, except I
I
don't
mean, primitive communism.
primitive communism. Yeah, but I don't like this even more. So yeah,
I'd argue
ten out.
this is actually very unequal. Actually, I don't think the purpose behind this ideology is to promote equality. The purpose behind the ideology is basically to let people live their own lives without government influencing anything at all. But yeah, this is just a really bad ideology. So, what do you guys think of all these ideologies? Which one is the worst of them all? Let me know in the comments. Do you think there's an ideology more extreme than any of these? So make sure to like this video down below and subscribe to the channel.